It's May 2nd here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with another rate freeze by the U.S. Federal Reserve. The Fed once again held its key interest rates at a 23-year high, with inflation pushing back the timing of a rate cut. The chair, Jerome Powell, did note, though, that it was unlikely that the central bank would hike rates again in this cycle. Hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters and counter-demonstrators have been arrested at university campuses across the U.S., while U.S.'s top envoy Antony Blinken and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met to discuss their different views on an Israeli offensive in Rafah. The new president of Major Doctors Association in South Korea vowed to make full efforts to untie a knot to alleviate the concerns of those in the medical circle, patients, and ordinary people. The government continues to call on the medical community to engage in dialogue. The Federal Reserve keeps its benchmark interest rate steady for the sixth session in a row, citing a struggle to bring inflation down. While the Fed Chair Jerome Powell downplayed a prospect of rate hikes this year. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun starts us off.
The U.S. Central Bank froze interest rates for the sixth consecutive time as inflation continues to persist. Following the latest Federal Market Open Committee meeting on Wednesday, benchmark interest rates in the U.S. remain in the 5.25 and 5.5% range. This latest decision comes as recent data show that the Consumer Price Index jumped by 3.5% in March compared to the same month the year before, prompting Fed officials to keep rates high. The Fed's preferred core inflation gauge in the same month, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, also rose by 2.8% on year. With stalled progress towards its target goal of bringing inflation down, it's increasingly likely that the central bank will maintain its restrictive monetary policy as it seeks greater confidence that inflation is coming down.
But inflation is still too high. Further progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain. We are fully committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal.
But the Fed also ruled out the possibility of a rate hike in the next meeting in June, with a resilient U.S. job market which saw an average of 276,000 payroll job gains per month in the first quarter of the year and low unemployment rates.
So I think it's unlikely that the next policy rate move will be a hike. I'd say it's unlikely. Our policy focus is really what I just mentioned, which is how long to keep policy restrictive.
This outlook was met with mixed responses from the U.S. stock market, some indexes rising and some falling. The benchmark S&P 500 and tech-heavy Nasdaq dropped about 0.3% as the market widely predicted that rates would stay unchanged, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average ended 0.2% higher than the previous close. Following the Bank of Korea's decision last month to maintain South Korea's benchmark interest rate, the rate gap between the two countries remains at its highest ever at 2 percentage points. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Again, no surprise that the Fed decided not to cut rates, with the timing such a cut appearing to be only getting pushed further away. Let's turn to Professor Shim Young-gil for more. Welcome back, Professor Shim.
Good morning.
As widely expected, there has been yet another rate freeze. We all saw it coming, though, right?
Yes, this is not a surprise move at all, as you just pointed out. Most importantly, the inflation risk is still there, as was emphasized by the Fed. And inflation rate was about 3% recently, which is about 1 percentage point higher than the target inflation rate of the Fed, which is 2%. In addition, the geographical risk, including the Ukraine-Russian war and Israel-Hamas war, have not yet been fully resolved, and actually they are expanded to the greater area, implying that the future risk on the inflation rate is still alive. And I think this makes the Fed to hesitate to change its stance quickly, even though GDP in the first quarter was announced to be lower than expected, because the Fed's first order of business is to control the price level.
Right. High inflation and also geopolitical tension over in the Middle East, and also rising labor costs are a reason for the Fed to be kind of cautious before considering the rate cuts, aren't they?
Yes, you're correct. Particularly the employment cost index in the first quarter rose by 1.2% compared to the previous period. And the index rose by 0.9% in the last quarter of 2023, implying that the labor cost is still a factor that can potentially increase the price level in the future. And the channel through which higher labor costs increase the inflation rate is called to be wage price spiral. And higher wage increases production costs, and the firm will set higher prices to make the profit. Then the workers will require even higher nominal wages to keep the purchasing power, and then the price will further increase by the firm. So as long as the labor market is tight, as we see nowadays, the Fed needs to be cautious in spurring the aggregate economy by lowering the interest rate.
Well, Professor Shim, the Fed said the rate cuts will for sure happen. That's what they said 6 weeks ago. But the question is, when will the first rate cut actually take place then?
I'm not sure, because there are so many concerns on the inflation rate. So what I think is the earliest time would be the end of this year, after the Fed collects important information on the labor market and on the aggregate economy, so that it can become more confident on the inflation rate. While there are some signs that the economy might need to cut the interest rate, like the GDP in the first quarter, but there are so many concerns on the future inflation rate, as I pointed out earlier, especially this collective tension in the Middle East and the labor cost. So as
please go ahead.
As the chairman of the Fed pointed out, the inflation rate is still very high compared to the target rate of the Fed. And also, if the Fed cuts the rate too early, and if the inflation rate hikes again, then there will be even higher cost to lower the inflation rate further.
So it may not be as soon as June that many analysts projected. While hopes for a rate cut within the year are kind of fading away, the interest rate gap between Korea and the U.S. widened to an all-time high. I'm sure the Bank of Korea is getting anxious.
Yeah, and the critical issue here is the exchange rate that really affects the Korean economy, which heavily depends on the export. The exchange rate has increased to about 1,400 per dollar, and this implies that the Korean won has depreciated by about 7% during this year, and it has depreciated about 12% during the last 1.5 years. And given that the timing of won depreciation almost coincide with the timing that the BOK stopped raising the policy rate, the BOK will really wait for the interest rate cut and in the US, so that it gives the BOK to have more rooms to cut the rate.
Right. All right, Professor Shim, thank you so much, as always, for your thorough analysis. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Physical clashes at universities in the U.S. between pro-Palestinian protesters and counter-demonstrators have led to police intervention and even canceled classes. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday, where they shared their different views on the looming Israeli offensive in Rafah. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The wave of pro-Palestinian protests across U.S. colleges has become more violent, with reports of clashes between pro-Palestinian protesters and counter-demonstrators. Over at Columbia University, the heart of the East Coast protests, over 100 protesters were arrested late Tuesday night when police moved in on those occupying Hamilton Hall and an encampment on a campus lawn. Those arrested inside the academic building will be charged with third-degree burglary, criminal mischief, and trespassing, while those participating in protests in the encampment will be charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. On the West Coast at UCLA, a violent clash between pro-Palestinian protesters and counter-protesters has led to police intervention. This has also prompted the university to cancel all classes for Wednesday. The White House on Wednesday responded to the growing tensions at universities across the nation. White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre stressed that Americans have the right to protest peacefully within the law, but added that a small number of students are causing the chaos. The spokesperson also said that President Joe Biden is scheduled to give a speech on the topic of anti-Semitism at a museum honoring Holocaust victims next week. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met on Wednesday to share their views on Israel's looming offensive in Rafah. Blinken reiterated Washington's stance that an operation in Rafah right now would diminish the chances of reaching a deal to release Israeli hostages, while also impacting U.S. efforts to promote normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. However, the Israeli leader told the visiting U.S. secretary that he would not accept an end to the war in Gaza as part of a potential hostage deal, while stressing that an offensive in Rafah will go ahead as planned. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
50 countries, including South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, have emphasized the need for objective and independent analysis on the enforcement of North Korean sanctions. The call for an independent body to analyze the implementation of North Korean sanctions comes as the countries released a joint statement on Wednesday, following the expiration on Tuesday of a UN expert panel tasked with overseeing sanctions on the regime. The statement slammed Russia for vetoing the renewal of the panel in March, saying it deprived UN member states of vital information and guidance and makes it harder for UN members to implement binding UNSC resolutions. However, it did underscore that existing sanctions remain in effect. South Korea's largest doctors group, the Korean Medical Association, launched its new leadership amid ongoing conflict between the government and the medical community. The new head vowed to form a consultative body for talks with the government, but not everyone in the medical community seems to be on board. Choi Min-jung reports.
The Korean Medical Association is now under the leadership of the new president, Lee Hyun-taek. In a Facebook post on Wednesday, the new head said he will make all-out efforts to untie a knot to alleviate the concerns from the medical community, patients, and the public. Im unveiled plans to form a consultative body consisting of medical students, professors, and doctors intended to serve as a one-on-one dialogue platform with the government. However, not everyone seems to be happy with Im's plans. Calling Im's actions arbitrary, the head of the Korean Intern Residents Association, Park Dan, claimed that Im had not discussed the plans with medical students before making the announcement. Meanwhile, the government once again emphasized its determination to push ahead with the reform of the medical system and urged the medical community to engage in dialogue.
Please think seriously about what the people and patients truly want and what is needed to build a sustainable medical system in the future and return to dialogue.
Doctors have rejected the government's call for talks amid protest over the government's plans to boost medical school quota. The prolonged walkout of residents has disrupted the country's medical service, with medical professors at Seoul's so-called Big Five hospitals recently confirming that they would take 1 day off per week due to fatigue. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol is planning a press conference around the time of the second anniversary of his inauguration, which is next Friday, May 10th, to tighten communications with the people and the media. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
President Yoon Suk-yeol is likely to hold a press conference to mark his second year in office and revive a senior secretary post in charge of civil affairs in the near future, in a move to sharpen his administration's sense of public sentiment. According to sources within Yoon's office, the president may hold a media conference as early as next week, either before or after May 10th, the day of his inauguration in 2022. The president has not held a presser since August that year to mark his 100th day in office. He also stopped his impromptu Q&A sessions with the media after a series of unsavory clashes with one local broadcaster. However, following his ruling People Power Party's heavy defeat at the general election last month, Yoon has vowed to improve his communication with the media and the public. His senior press secretary Yoon said in a TV interview Monday that the public can expect to see a press conference to mark 2 years of the administration. The top office is also moving towards reviving a position Yoon previously scrapped when he took office. A senior secretary for civil affairs may soon be appointed to broadly manage personnel issues within the administration and pick up on political trends and public sentiment. Yoon, during his electoral campaign, had pledged to abolish the position, citing misdeeds that occurred under previous administrations, as the secretary wielded too much power over government bodies and could investigate civilians. When instating the new secretary, Yoon will reportedly focus more on discerning public sentiment.
But I think what he would probably do in this context is to use the position as a way to help implement, and also, again, part of this issue of messaging, his domestic policies, and to be a point where this can be coordinated as best as it can be, given the control of the Democratic Party, but as a medium towards which, domestic policies can be sort of pursued in a more comprehensive way.
According to Realmeter on Monday, the leader's approval rating fell for the third consecutive week to 30.2%, the lowest since August 2022. The president himself having apologized for failing to reflect the wishes of the people, the Yoon administration is taking steps to become more receptive and interactive with the public. Observers say the manner of how he conducts his long-stalled media conference will be the first test of progress. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The capital city's annual festival, Seoul Festa 2024, kicked off on this Wednesday, running for 6 days. As our Yoon reports, visitors can explore the city's diverse charms through a variety of engaging experiences.
Seoul Festa 2024 is here. Presented by the Seoul City Government, the third edition of the city's Spring Festival features experience events in popular locations such as Seoul Plaza, Gwanghwamun Square, and Myeongdong.
Until last year, Seoul Festa mostly featured concert-style programs centered around K-pop. This year, we've integrated a range of elements such as fashion, beauty, K-pop art, and more to create an exciting and diverse festival for everyone to enjoy, both locals and tourists.
Seoul Plaza kicks off the first day of the festival with a K-pop concert, while Gwanghwamun Square turned into a playground where visitors can experience the city's culture, fashion, beauty, cuisine, and more. At the food zone, visitors enjoyed Korea's street snacks and desserts.
It's really good, it's very savory, but we like Korean food.
At the culture zone, visitors can create their own Korean name.
They gave you a Korean name. It was for a fun purpose. For purpose. Yeah, it was really cool. It was really fun. Funny, so.
It was and they gave us like that name, Jinji Chung and
Sayo.
It was fun.
Many more artistic activities are stationed at the culture zone, such as writing Korean calligraphy and drawing Seoul City. And those with a competitive edge can play takji, one of Korea's traditional games. The game is played using folded paper squares. Players take turns flicking their takji to flip over those of their opponents. Another popular zone is focused on K-beauty.
Here at the beauty zone, you can try out K-beauty styling for hair, makeup, and nails. Also, don't miss the chance to capture your Seoul Festa moments with a glamorous photo shoot.
There are also K-pop challenges and tours of different spots in Seoul. This includes Korean barbecue parties in Noil Park with beautiful views of the Hangang River. The event runs until next Monday, with more details on the festival's official website. Yoon, Arirang News.
Good morning. I'm Kim Si-young, and now we turn off to stories from around the world. We begin today with coverage of protests around the world to mark Labor Day. Workers and activists demonstrated in major cities around the globe on Wednesday for greater labor rights and concerns over the increase in cost of living. In France, some 200,000 protesters took to the streets in May Day rallies across the country. The marches in Paris saw violent clashes, with French police firing tear gas at protesters, while 12 police officers were injured after a homemade explosive was set off. A total of 45 people were detained at the Paris march. In Turkey, police in Istanbul fired rubber bullets and tear gas at thousands who attempted to break through a barricade to reach Taksim Square in a symbolic defiance against the ban on protests in the public square. The Turkish Interior Minister said at least 210 people were detained. In Latin America, thousands of workers gathered in major cities such as Bogota, Buenos Aires, Lima and Santiago, chanting demands for better labor rights and an improvement of domestic economic conditions. Large-scale May Day rallies took place in Asia, where thousands in Indonesia, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Japan and South Korea took to the streets on Wednesday. Moving over to Colombia, where President Gustavo Petro said Wednesday that he will cut diplomatic ties with Israel over its actions in Gaza. Speaking at the annual International Workers' Day march, Colombian President Petro heavily criticized Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that Colombia is breaking diplomatic ties due to what he described as a genocidal president. Petro added that Israel's actions have led to the times of genocide, adding that if Palestine dies, humanity dies. Colombia also requested to join South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Heavy rains in Brazil this week have led to at least 8 deaths in the country's southern state of Rio Grande do Sul. That's according to the Brazilian Civil Defense Service on Wednesday, who said that 21 people were reported missing. Flooding and high river levels were seen across the state, and authorities reported that over 1,400 individuals were displaced. In the state government's report on hydrological conditions on Tuesday, it said that there is a risk of flooding across the entire state as continued heavy rain is expected in the coming days. It also warned the possibility of flash floods and landslides in areas near river basins. And finally to the Gaza Strip, where charity World Central Kitchen resumed operations in the war-torn area a month after 7 of the organization's workers were killed in an Israeli airstrike. WCK said earlier this week it had almost 8 million meals in 276 trucks ready to enter through the Rafah crossing, while some trucks will be sent into Gaza via Jordan. Before the deaths of WCK personnel on April 1st, the charity had distributed 43 million meals in Gaza since the beginning of the war, which it says accounts for 62% of all international NGO aid in the region. World Central Kitchen has demanded an independent investigation into the attack. Israel has admitted breaches of military procedure, dismissed 2 senior officers and reprimanded senior commanders over the strike.
Good morning. Seesaw temperatures continue today, swinging from single digits to the mid-20s within a few hours. Inland regions are seeing even lower morning temperatures with frost and even ice in mountainous areas. So please do dress accordingly today. Southern regions will finally see some sunshine this afternoon with very strong UV rays during the day. So have your sunglasses and a hat ready to protect yourself from very high UV rays. With sunshine, southern regions will notice highs jumping 1 to 5 degrees higher this afternoon, and Daegu and Gwangju should get up to 24 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Seoul will be as warm as yesterday at 24 degrees. The air quality will be normal to good nationwide. Meanwhile, dry advisory is in place for east of Seoul. Nationwide rain in the forecast on Children's Day weekend, with rain forecast from Sunday afternoon continuing into next Tuesday. So please plan accordingly for your 3-day weekend. And that rain will put the brakes on summer-like temperatures. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Friday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.